My brother went to law school at Rutgers and he would show up drunk. They wanted to kick him out. She became a professor there in order to manage that. When he got pulled over for, and these are things I found out later, when he got pulled over for drunk driving or showing up on someone's lawn with his car and got arrested, my mother would use her power to get him out. And this is a woman who's very ethical and very caring, compassionate, and giving. She lost herself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Today, I'm joined by psychotherapist Jessica Pressler, who brings nearly 4 decades of experience helping individuals heal from narcissistic abuse, trauma, grief, and self-sabotage. Her work focuses on understanding the unconscious conditioning that keeps people trapped in cycles of self-abandonment and toxic attachments. Jessica is also the host of the Your Traitor Within podcast and the author of The Sibling We Don't Talk About, Understanding and Surviving a Narcissistic Brother or Sister, which is how I first came across her work. I realized I hadn't focused specifically on the experience of growing up with a narcissistic sibling. That's one of the reasons I was interested in having Jessica on the show, to explore this important and often overlooked topic. As you'll hear, our conversation extends beyond the familiar question, and for those of you who have been following this podcast, I don't think you'll be surprised that I really wanted to understand not just what did the narcissistic sibling do to you, but instead, we explore how one sibling can gradually become the emotional center of the entire family, how parents and siblings unknowingly support and then adapt around that person. As you'll hear, I'm interested in understanding the unconscious processes that organize the family. How does one child come to occupy so much psychological space? How do the parents unknowingly reinforce and give a child so much power? And what happens to the other children whose emotional needs slowly disappear in the process? In this first part of our discussion, Jessica and I trace the development of her family system, from her memories of her brother to the ways her parents became organized around him, and ultimately how his needs for exclusive emotional, and I quote, possession affected every important relationship around him. Healing from a narcissistic sibling is not simply about understanding the sibling. That's a very important first step. It's also about understanding the entire family system that held everyone in place. In this conversation, we cover a lot more. I'm really excited to share this with you, so let's get right into it. Hello, Jessica. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm really glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be here with you today.
Great. So let's jump right in, because before we get into some of the family dynamics, I would love just to give the listeners some context. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your brother, what it was like growing up with your brother. And more specifically, I guess at what point did you begin to realize that this was not simply about your brother's behavior, but that maybe something a little deeper was going on, either within him, or we can even say within your entire family, and how they were responding to him? Maybe we could start there, if that's okay.
Of course. Now, mine is a little bit unique because my brother and I were 10 years apart.
Yeah.
No other siblings, when you are talking about narcissistic siblings, many times the siblings are closer together. I was over 10 years older. So when he came into our family, I was already starting to have my own friends and separating a bit, but I was observing. I noticed that at a very, very young age. And now I like to state that all children have narcissistic qualities, right? Everything is about them. The world is about them. But even at 3, 4, 5 years old, I watched him manipulate my parents. It wasn't toward me. It was toward them. And although I, of course, know that that also meant my parents were part of that. Were part of the triangulation. So
Yes.
my mother and my brother would side together. And my father would try to parent, and my mother would tell my father, no, like my brother would be running around the dinner table, and my brother would say something like, sit down. And my mother would say, he doesn't have to. It started quite young. Now, I observed this. I observed this as a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. But I'll be honest with you, I left the family home. I was independent outside of the home. Inside the home, I was the silent one. I was, the invisible one. My brother was very gregarious. He was adorable. I loved him. I didn't notice anything at this point. I noticed that he lit up the room. People loved being around him. He was just fun to be around.
Can I jump in just because you did notice one thing you said, and I was very curious about that myself, that like if he was running around or doing something, misbehaving in some way, that your mother was very supportive of that, right? And I understand. I can appreciate that you weren't thinking about it like that perhaps back then. But in hindsight, because I know you've written about this quite a bit and you've given it a lot of consideration, how did you come to understand that? Like, in other words, he's behaving in some way, and now the family, your mother more so, but even your father to some extent, seemed to be centering around him.
Absolutely centered around him. So I was observing it. But honestly, at that moment, I was feeling very bad for my father. But I was also daddy's little girl. So there was a piece there as well. I already kind of knew my dad didn't want a child then. So this part of the dynamic is important as well. I was adopted. Now we had a genetic connection, my brother and myself. So I was already feeling a little bit separate from the family unit.
Yeah.
But again, this observation truly was about them and about not thinking this was okay. I was already thinking, let's say I'm 15 years old, already thinking about psychology. So yes, I did observe that it was not the parenting, I guess, but I also felt very sad for my father because I felt like if he was the one on the outside. Yes. And to give the whole dynamic, if you'd like to understand the whole family dynamic.
Yeah, let's stay with your father because I'm glad you actually went there. If you don't mind, I just want to read something. I mentioned this in the introduction. How I initially came across you and your work was in an article that I read. I won't read the whole thing. I just want to paraphrase because you are talking about your father. And in the article, you mentioned that this is a man, you said, who spent decades learning not to cross his son. In a way, he became organized almost around survival, you said, and you used the word appeasement in the article. And this was very powerful. And I was wondering if you could speak to this, that you said your father learned the way a hostage learns, right? That the path of least destruction ran directly through compliance. And I was wondering if you could flush that out, because you just mentioned your dad, and that's brought back to mind this really powerful passage.
And I will tell you about my father because I wrote about him, but it really was both my parents. My brother ruled the family, because we're talking as a child, but let's just get into his teenage years. And my father also didn't want to push my mother away. So he was not only hostage of my brother, but their unit. So my father would handle it by being also quiet. He would drink in a corner, depressed. And my brother he used benzos, he used alcohol, and he chaotically, I guess, he brought chaos to the family. And my mother would hyper-focus on him and take care of that, keeping the family system private. But yes, in order to survive that system, in order to survive my brother, you had to walk on eggshells. You had to be very careful in order to not be the focus of his wrath.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't observe a lot of this until I looked back. So I don't know a lot of detail. And in these early years, because I was 15, I met my then husband-to-be and went to college and never came back again. My observations was basically as an adult looking back. And I think a lot of times people will look back and see a lot of the the chaos that occurs in the home. I was fooled by my brother. I actually thought everything focused on my parents. Now, in regard to the addiction and in regard to the money, I know I spoke about this in my article. My brother came up with a lot of very expensive ideas for businesses. He was very intelligent, and my parents would actually millions of dollars into his businesses, and they would never work. I think that he may have also been bipolar.
Your parents, you mean?
My son. Oh, that's a nice Freudian slip for you. My brother.
Oh, I see.
And so my father and my mother would appease him and give him lots of money for these businesses. And it would start and it would fail, and the new one would happen, it would fail. And so in his manic state, he would have these grandiose ideas, and they would give him money, probably to appease him. I think they probably were scared of him looking back.
Well, it's both, right? And it's giving him, I could imagine, more and more psychological power over the family.
He had incredible power over.
Yeah.
When my mother was alive, my mother was the one who managed it. My mother was an appellate court judge in New Jersey. She was very powerful. She was by her own right, but it was very important for her to keep all the family secrets down. Family unit. In doing so, But my brother went to law school at Rutgers, and he would show up drunk. They wanted to kick him out. She became a professor there in order to manage that. When he got pulled over for, and these are things I found out later, when he got pulled over for drunk driving or showing up on someone's lawn with his car and got arrested, my mother would use her power to get him out. And this is a woman who's very ethical and very caring, compassionate, and giving. She lost herself. She lost her ethics.
Yeah, that's what I was just hearing, that this isn't just about like a narcissistic brother. What you're describing then is parents who lost their way, that through the appeasing or accommodating and actually giving him more and more power over time, that it became like the whole family structure now was sort of bolstering or supporting this.
Right. So exactly correct. So this is how they would handle it. He basically came home from college and he was more powerful than he ever had been before.
Yeah.
So they got a home that was about an hour away, and they would leave in order. This is how they went. At moments, they would say to me, "This is how I survive. I need to go away for a weekend." They give him the other home, and he would throw these crazy parties. I mean, this is where the manic piece would come in, where my aunt's mink coat, kind of a Hugh Hefner look, telling everyone this is his house. And then he would trash the house, and he would have my parents' housekeeper, and this was cruel, wake up at 3, 4 in the morning and clean it up so my parents wouldn't see the mess. And say to her, "I will tell immigration that you're here." This was more than just narcissism, right? This is malignant, if not worse. And this would happen every weekend. So my parents would handle it by escaping, and he wanted that. He wanted the space. But if he would spend time with me, or he would spend time, I know I spoke in the article about my children's bat mitzvahs.
I want to hear about that. Wait, just before we get to that, because that's a very important part of the story as well, is what happened in your moments, right? When you had moments where seemingly attention, right? Where you had a moment to be the center of the family, they were disrupted. But before we get there, I just want to stay with what you're mentioning now because it seems so significant.
Yes.
Again, looking back, I know at the time, like everything was very different emotionally for you as you're in it, like your subjective experience, of course, is different than when you look back. But what do you think was going on? Like what prevented your parents from stepping in and being more like parents, let's say, instead of enabling this kind of behavior?
Well, I think my mother said it best. She said, if she didn't do this, he was going to die. She believed and she said it. One time only, I mentioned the overuse of drugs and alcohol, and she would not go there until one day that she became scared. And she called, and we got together, and she had an intervention person come to the home. Was told by the intervention person, they only let him stay for a very short time. It was supposed to be, I think, a 4-day, very intense process. They kicked him out very early on because he suggested to do a little bit of tough love, right? And they said, if they don't continue to do what they're doing in every way, he is going to die. And so that is one of the ways that he manipulated.
So your mother had that fear, but then somebody confirmed it? Did I hear that correctly, that your brother would die if what did or didn't happen?
They didn't do everything they have been doing. They didn't keep the family unit the way it was. If they did anything to tell him he shouldn't be drinking, for example, and it go against anything that he wanted to do.
So that's so interesting. So the recommendation was to continue doing exactly what was happening.
The recommendation was not to continue to do it. So he fired.
Oh, I see.
So they fired the intervention person.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes much more sense.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Because your parents were not ready to hear that they needed to do something differently. I guess, like to my question, what was preventing them from stepping in and being parents? And the intervention person is saying, look, you need to do something differently. Like maybe, I don't know if he made any suggestions, but maybe behave more like a parent, rather than someone who would enable the behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
And even so, they contacted the intervention person when they were afraid that he was going to die from his use.
Yeah.
Being down to it, they couldn't change their behavior.
They could not.
Rejected or, by him, and they didn't want him to die.
Let me pull another piece out of the article. Okay, something else that you wrote, because I think it fits in very nicely here. Because as you just said, no, they weren't going to change their behavior. In my mind, I'm already thinking about, what are they really afraid of? Yes, on one level, they're afraid he's going to die. I completely understand that, especially given the behaviors that you're describing right now. But in the article, I'm going to, again, paraphrase something you wrote, and I'd love to develop it a little bit more. And you wrote, my mother used to say that he, meaning your brother in this context, so I'll just say your brother believed that she was his mother in some sort of possessive sense. And I quote that word possessive because it seems so significant right here in terms of what you're describing, as if she belonged to him entirely, and any claim anyone else had on her was like a theft. By the way, you write very well. I just want to say, like, it sort of pulled me in when I was reading your story. But again, I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, especially the part about the possessiveness.
Well, I think that started with my earlier example when he was quite young. And before my brother was a few years old, my parents had a very playful relationship. Despite the fact that there was some infidelity, putting that aside, what I saw was very playful and loving.
Infidelity from your father, you mean? I thought, okay.
Yeah, but they really started right when my brother was born too. And there was very playful. That all changed. I mean, he took, and my mother allowed, she was a grown-up, so I want to be very clear. Everything changed after he was born. And he took my mother from my father. My mother allowed it. Again, they went together. And he ran this woman who was, again, an appellate court judge, came in the court system at a time where women did not do that. Or I could go on and on about how great she is. There's a lot of, people aren't so simple, right? They're complex.
Yes.
So she's a wonderful woman, but he was right. He completely controlled her in everything. He gave up her ethics, right? But very ethical in every other way. She compromised her soul almost in order to save him over and over and over and over again.
Oh, I want to pick up on that too. Maybe we could get to that in a moment, but let's stay with this because what you're describing here, not to get too technical, but you're thinking about a narcissistic sibling, a brother in this case, right? And this is something that's such a big part of it. It's almost like the two of them, I understand, were in this together, but in your brother's mind, because of this possessiveness, she was merely an extension of himself, if that makes sense. In other words, he had the claim over her and he believed like that she belonged to him because, like I said, she's just an extension and something that we call, just not to go too far down this rabbit hole, like what we call part objects, rather than relating to her as a whole separate person. So I think if that makes sense, it may explain why what you were about to say just a moment ago, I think at your wedding you wrote about, or the bar mitzvah you were just about to mention, something happened in each of those situations.
So there are many examples, and I'll talk about the ones that I wrote about and it showed up as I got older. He showed this part of him. And my mother, which I don't know if I wrote about, how her response was. So the night before one of my weddings, which was in their backyard, my husband-to-be and I set up the backyard with tables and chairs, with the catering company, the bar, everything was set up because the wedding was going to be the next day. And we go home to sleep to come back to get married. And he came back. He literally took the tables, the chairs, threw them in the pool, ate food and just left everything around, took the alcohol out, and it was a cyclone hit. And I told my mother, I don't want him at my wedding. And she thinks it's not going to happen. Of course, he's coming to your wedding. He lives here with us. You can't do that. And carry on. That was my mother's saying, carry on. We go on. And that was just one example. The other examples were after my mother died.
Wait, stay with that. That's again, another such a rich example. It has me, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. Another really painful experience. So I just want to put that out there. And the second thing that occurred to me was, your mother, and we could go again into this later. We don't have to go too far right now. But of course he was coming to your wedding because he is she is he. In other words, they're like one at this moment. That's what I meant by an extension of himself. Yeah. So she cannot then allow him to not come because she's coming, if that makes sense. And for him to destroy, it's your moment. You see, the wedding, this is such an important part of your life, a moment in your life, something that was going to belong to you, separate from the family, right? Where you would get some attention, but he already owns that attention. You see, that's the possessiveness. In his mind, it's not just merely jealousy. It's like you're taking something. I'm just going into the mind of what I hear, from many of my own patients that I treat who have these narcissistic characteristics. See, in other words, you're not just functioning as a separate person, but you're taking something of his. I'm not saying it makes sense.
No, and it happened every big event. So what happened at my children's bar mitzvah, the bar mitzvah, while my mother was still alive. Anyone who's been to one knows that the Torah portion is probably the most important piece of the mitzvah. So my son is about to go and do the Torah portion, and I'm sitting next to my mother and father in the pew, I guess it's called, the chair, the bench. And my brother comes to in between them, I guess they're next to me, in between them and says, "We have to go now." And I'm hearing this, and because he couldn't tolerate it, I think. So I hear that. And then my mother gets up and I said, "Mom, he's about to, And my mother gets up and she says, "Oh, I have to go. And my father refuses to go. I give him credit. He doesn't. And they go back. And then after my mother died, this is where my father still had a little bit of a push-pull before my mother died. When my mother died, my father said to me, "Your mother passed your brother on to me now. and now I have to do her job. And it's a curse. He said that, and then he would go to the other part where he would just do whatever he needed to do to survive. And so at my daughter's, he refused to come. I didn't invite my brother. I was actually scared of him at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk about what happened there when I was told to not to block him, put boundaries up.
Yeah.
But he was not invited to my daughter's 3 years later, and my father refused to come.
Oh, so he really did take on the role of your mother. Unfortunately, you see, your father seemed to appear to be a little bit more psychologically separate from all this, just a little bit more. But then that quote that you just gave me, that your mother put this on him to play that role. Right. And unfortunately, he really took that seriously, because now he and your brother, from what you're describing, are of like one mind. So if your brother's not invited, now your father can't come, because that's a separation.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And it would happen again and again. If my parents were invited to my house for just dinner, just an hour, he would always call and say he needed them to come home.
Yeah.
It would just, and if he didn't, he would call and say something that would be upsetting to them. It's on in their head.
This is something I want to push into a little bit more as well, because I want to go back to the quote from your mother, from what I read from the article, because you're still touching on it. So I want to develop that a little bit further. I want to also talk about your own experience, right, in terms of living through this, but also healing, and like, how does someone then live a separate life from this family? Now, you had one thing on your side, which you mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation, is you were 10 years older, I think you said. So that allowed for a certain amount of what I think seems to be one of the biggest problems right now in the family structure, is a separate mind, a separate life, a separate existence. So you had age, believe it or not, on your side. But I'm wondering, because this is a nice place for us to pull this together, but in the next part of our conversation, if we could go into those two things just a little bit more. I want to go a little bit more into sort of the dynamics in the family, mostly with your mother, and then the way she spoke to your father, and then he took this on. And then we want to get into your framework as well, right? That's something we want to touch on, because I think that's part of the healing process. So maybe, how does that sound for you if we go in that direction next?
That sounds incredible.
There's still so much more to say about this, but we have to stop here for now. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.